The nurse handed a note with the prescription to the millionaire and forbade him from attending the wedding. Upon reading it, the banker froze. The sun bathed the hospital park in autumn rays, making each leaf glow with a vibrant color. Mary smiled happily and playfully kicked up some orange leaves with her foot. It had only been a couple of months since she started working at the hospital, and she had already fallen in love with this alley. It was beautiful in any season, and the patients loved to stroll here. "Oh, here comes our Mary," one of the patients joyfully shouted. Always in a great mood. The patients adored her. They said her smile helped them recover. But Mary wanted to truly heal people. She had dreamed of becoming a doctor since school. She couldn't secure a spot in the free department, and there was no money for the paid one, nor anyone to help. Until recently, she lived with her stepfather, who did nothing but drink, showing no desire to get a job. Helen, Mary's mother, had gotten together with him when Mary was in middle school. Back then, he still held it together, drinking only on weekends or holidays. But when Helen suddenly died due to a blood clot, everything changed overnight. Her stepfather started drinking almost every day and was soon fired from his job. That's when Mary's nightmare began. He started bringing friends home, drinking around the clock, and demanded that his stepdaughter set the table for them. He could wake her up in the middle of the night and send her for vodka, but Mary flatly refused to do so. She even had to run away a couple of times and spend the night in a neighbor's basement, which she had once stumbled upon and found to be a refuge. Fortunately, someone had left a pile of wooden crates there, from which Mary made herself a bed. Everything ended when she got a job as a nurse at the local hospital. She immediately decided to put an end to the nightmare, and with her first salary, she rented a small but very cozy apartment on the outskirts. It was, of course, far from her workplace, but at least no one was arguing or demanding booze and money. Every day started calmly and peacefully, and now Mary found herself waking up, rejoicing each day. The work wasn't what a girl her age dreams of, but Mary was happy. She secretly hoped to catch up on the necessary subjects in a year and try to enroll again. Meanwhile, each morning she gladly went to her therapy department, feeling that she was helping those who needed it. The staff accepted her as one of their own from the first day. The nurses were all much older. Many could have been her mothers or grandmothers. They felt sorry for the delicate, red-haired Mary and tried to take on the dirty work themselves, saying it wasn't proper for her to change men's diapers or carry bedpans, for which she was very grateful. In return, Mary could mop the entire floor of the department in one go, doing it for all the nurses at once. Ms. Roberson, who was responsible for distributing food to the patients, always discreetly packed any leftovers into a small bag for Mary, quietly saying, "Here you go, my dear. When you get home tonight, you won't need to spend money on food. You'll save a bit. No one is helping you, after all. I know how much you want to enjoy life while you're young." This was indeed a helpful contribution to Mary's not-so-large budget. However, not everyone in the hospital was as kind to their colleagues. The entire therapy department seemed to be unofficially divided into two parts. The first part was the junior medical staff, consisting of orderlies and nurses who worked for low salaries and did everything selflessly, from the heart. The second part was the doctors, who were willing to do anything to please Kevin Ross, the head of the department. As specialists, they were almost perfect, but on a personal level, they were ready to destroy each other to earn the boss's praise. A couple of times, even Sharon Graves, Mary's supervisor, seeing Kevin Ross from a distance, decided to ingratiate herself. She tried to raise her voice, looking for a reason to find fault with Mary's impeccable work. But Mary calmly answered all her questions and, turning away, went on with her duties. She had gotten used to standing up for herself since living with her stepfather, and now it served her well. Mary was finishing cleaning the corridor when an unusual commotion began in the department. A patient was being urgently transferred from the only double room to a triple. The head nurse was almost running, urging Lori, the orderly working the same shift as Mary, to hurry up. "Lori, why are you dragging your feet?" the supervisor yelled at her. "I'll fire you if you don't get this place spotless in half an hour." As soon as she left, Mary approached to find out what the rush and shouting were about. Lori explained that they were admitting a wealthy man, reportedly a well-known businessman in the city. Sighing, the orderly added, "Who brought him here? Must be the devil himself. He should be going to a private hospital. I don't understand what he's thinking. People with that kind of money usually avoid places like ours. But whatever, it's not for us to judge. I'll just keep scrubbing to make it look like an apartment." Mary offered her help, but Lori, knowing the supervisor wouldn't like it, politely declined. In just half an hour, the ordinary double room was nearly transformed into a single luxury suite fit for a wealthy man. From the head's office, they brought in beautiful table clocks, a kettle, and a microwave. They borrowed an unusual floor vase and a pitcher with a couple of glasses from the head nurse. Somehow, they even managed to find an old but functional television. Standing at the exit of the room, Lori surveyed everything and, with a sad smile, said, "I'd love to spend a couple of weeks in a place like this, but it seems our kind doesn't get such honors." Just as she finished speaking, the supervisor rushed in. Instead of words of gratitude for the swift and perfect work, she hissed, "Make sure to cater to this patient. Any desire, any whim, anticipate everything. He has so much money that he could buy the entire department if he wanted to. Make sure everything shines. He must be satisfied with everything," she hissed before leaving. As soon as she was gone, Lori grumbled angrily, "Sure, we do all the caring and pampering, but that which reaps the benefits. Do you know why she and Mr. Ross are so agitated? They're expecting a big fat tip from the patient, and we'll get nothing but crumbs. Come on, Mary, let's go before they bring this bourgeois in." They left the room, closing the door behind them, and went about their respective tasks. Mary didn't see the new patient being brought in, but she immediately noticed the heightened tension around his room. Doctors and nurses kept coming in, some to check his condition, others with IVs or medication. Sharon Graves took control, ensuring the room was cleaned more thoroughly and frequently than the others. Appearing in the hospital corridor once again, Sharon called Mary over and ordered her to clean the banker's room. By this time, everyone in the therapy department knew that the new patient was the owner of the city's largest banks. Mary's eyes widened with fear. She wanted to do anything but go into that room. She always imagined bankers as fat, sweaty men who were picky and mean. But she couldn't disobey her boss. With a trembling hand, Mary knocked on the door, opened it, and timidly asked for permission to clean. A pleasant male voice responded, "It seems clean enough, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. Rules are rules. Please, come in." Mary looked at the speaker and nearly dropped her bucket in surprise. Instead of the anticipated fat man, a handsome gentleman lay on the bed. The first thing she noticed was his beautiful and very kind eyes. For a few minutes, Mary stood rooted to the spot, but quickly regained her composure and started cleaning. Unexpectedly, the patient spoke in a friendly, good-natured tone. "Imagine, my wedding is around the corner, and here I am, stuck in the hospital. I thought I'd just stay home with a fever for a couple of days, and look how it turned out." At that moment, the patient was seized by a violent cough. Quickly removing her gloves, Mary handed him a glass of water. As she helped him drink, she said, "Don't worry. We have the best doctors in the city. They'll have you back on your feet in no time. For now, it's best if you rest, sleep and good treatment are most important." She carefully adjusted his blanket, and he smiled at her gratefully before closing his eyes. For the rest of the day, Mary couldn't stop thinking about the new patient. She was struck by how, despite his wealth, he had chosen to come to their hospital and spoke to her as an equal, even though she was acutely aware of the vast gulf between them. That evening, as Mary left the hospital, David was already waiting for her. For the past 6 months since their first meeting, he often met her after work. Their relationship couldn't yet be called serious. They simply walked around the city, went to the movies, and Mary enjoyed their time together. But she was still afraid to take their relationship to the next level. It seemed to her that they didn't know each other well enough, and she kept asking David to wait. "Why are you so lost in thought today?" David asked, putting his arm around Mary. Almost relieved by the question, she began to speak. "Oh, David, you wouldn't believe what happened today. They brought a banker into our department with suspected pneumonia. Everything went crazy. Everyone's running around, trying to please him. They gave him an entire room. The head even brought his TV from the office. They say this banker has so much money he could buy the whole hospital. I thought he'd be old and grumpy, but he's not like that at all. He's just like any other person and talks to me as if we've known each other forever." David stopped and, taking her chin in his hand, asked playfully, "Hey, has my sweet little mouse fallen for this money bag?" Fortunately, it was dark, and he couldn't see the blush spreading across her face. "Oh, stop it," she brushed him off. "What are you talking about? I have you. Come on, why are we standing here?" That evening, left alone, Mary caught herself thinking she couldn't get the brown-eyed handsome man from the hospital room out of her head. She really liked him, even though she had only seen him a few times that day, once when she came to clean and the second time when the head nurse asked her to bring him a meal clearly not from the hospital kitchen. This time, as soon as she entered the room, the patient smiled warmly and suggested they get acquainted, saying it would be easier to communicate while he was in the department. Tyler, that was the banker's name, asked Mary to come by more often, saying he would be very glad. At that moment, she was ready to stay at work indefinitely and keep vigil by his bedside around the clock. The next morning, as soon as she started her duties, she decided to check on the previous day's patient. The door was slightly ajar, and Mary reached for the handle when she heard a woman's voice. An unseen stranger was speaking. "Arthur, stop being a coward. Your task is only to get the medicine we talked about. I'll discreetly add it to the groom's wedding drink. Half an hour, and it's done. I'll be a young widow, and you, my loyal and devoted friend, will soon become my husband. Do you understand that in this case, you won't just be someone's partner, but the rightful owner of everything he has?" The speaker laughed unpleasantly, and her companion, after a pause, responded, "You do realize this is risky? If it all comes out, we'll be jailed, and I definitely don't want to end up in prison." "Listen, stop freaking out," the woman snapped angrily. "Be a man. I've thought it all through and even talked to the attending doctor. He said Tyler will be allowed to go to the wedding. We'll just blame it on the doctors, saying they didn't treat him properly, didn't catch it in time. The disease affected his heart, and Tyler's heart stopped. Have you changed your mind already? We both planned this out, and this hospital is a perfect opportunity. You have no idea how hard it was to convince him to come here instead of a private clinic, where they would have fought for their reputation and dragged us to court. With these simpletons, it's a piece of cake. A couple of bribes were needed, and you'll see, it'll all be blamed on the hospital. Now, hurry up and find the medicine. We're running out of time." Mary instinctively took a step back, fearing the speakers would come out and see her. She couldn't believe what she heard wasn't a dream. She stood frozen for several minutes until Laurie's voice brought her back to reality. "Mary, good morning. Why are you standing in the way? Move aside." Turning around, Mary saw the wealthy patient in a wheelchair, skillfully maneuvered by Laurie. She helped wheel the patient into the room and settle him on the bed. Meanwhile, she tried to discreetly observe the guests whose conversation she had overheard. The woman was very beautiful. Tall, slender, with perfect makeup and an impeccably fitting pantsuit, she looked like a model Mary had only seen on TV. The young man was her equal. Tall, with a neat beard and a clearly expensive suit, he looked at Mary with some disdain, sending chills down her spine. She quickly left the room, but the overheard conversation lingered in her mind. Seizing a moment, she approached Laurie and whispered, "Laurie, do you happen to know who those two were in the rich guy's room?" Squinting cunningly, Laurie whispered back, "Why do you ask?" "That was his fiancée." He told me while I was taking him to get an x-ray that our doctor promised to get him back on his feet quickly so he could marry and dance at his wedding. The handsome guy with her is his, what do they call it? I forgot the word. Well, the one who handles some business with him. You better not get any ideas, girl. Such a beauty will break your legs in no time. Mary put on an indifferent face and snorted. Who cares? I have Tyler. Besides, he's so handsome and rich. He needs a fiancée like her, and I'm just a poor mouse, as David says. Sighing, she went to clean the neighboring room, but mentally she was already thinking about how to find the time and tactfully tell the rich man what she had overheard. When she had figured out a plan, an opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. Oh, Mary! Amanda, a young nurse, interrupted her thoughts. Please help, I'm completely swamped. Can you take this prescription to our elite room, you know, where the banker is? Tell him the doctor said to prepare for discharge, but that he must buy these medicines and take them as a preventative measure. It's all written there. Thank you in advance, I have to go put in 4 in the old lady in room 4. Mary grabbed her hand and said fearfully. Wait, you know it's against the rules for me to do that, Mary protested. On one hand, she wanted to quickly inform the patient about the conspiracy, on the other, she was very scared to do so. But her friend was insistent. Come on, what's the big deal? Just a minute. Hand over the paper, and you're free. If I don't put this 4 in that nasty old lady in room 4, she'll go straight to the head doctor again. Don't be afraid, go, no one will find out. Amanda practically pushed Mary toward the banker's room and ran to the other end of the corridor. Mary hesitantly knocked. Tyler, seeing her, smiled and said cheerfully, Can you believe it, Mary? I'm lucky. It didn't develop into pneumonia, thank God, and I'm feeling much better. Come in, don't be shy. What's that in your hands? Mary relayed everything the nurse had told her and, before handing over the prescription, took out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She had spent a long time thinking about how to tell Tyler what she had overheard and decided to write everything down. It was more convenient that way, to hand it over without staying in his room for too long, something their superiors scolded them for. It seemed to her the most convenient way to convey the information. Mary wrote it right after Tyler's visitors left, but the opportunity to give it to him came only now. Handing the papers to Tyler, she quietly said, Forgive me, I know it's not my place, but you shouldn't go to the wedding. Be careful, it's all written here. Giving him the papers, she quickly left the room and tried not to think about what had happened. When it was time to do the scheduled cleaning in the banker's room, Mary nervously stepped through the door, avoiding looking at Tyler. She didn't know how he would react to her note, but decided to act as if nothing had happened. For about 5 minutes, he watched silently as she diligently dusted every surface, then unexpectedly said, You know, Mary, after carefully reading your note, I first thought you were crazy. Then I thought, forgive me, that you had fallen in love with me and were trying to stop the wedding. But after much thought, I realized there was some truth in your note. You described everything very precisely without knowing many things. Thank you for daring to inform me, but the wedding will go on, and I will attend. Pamela wants our celebration to happen quickly because she's pregnant, so it will be as planned. Tyler winked at Mary and added sadly, Don't worry, beautiful, everything will be fine. Whatever will be, will be. At that moment, Mary felt like falling to her knees and begging Tyler not to go to the wedding. She felt so sorry for this kind, intelligent, and handsome man, but she understood that she couldn't stop him. Mary looked at him with pleading eyes and quietly said, But can a loving person wish harm? She loves you, right? Suddenly scared by her own curiosity, Mary fell silent and walked toward the door, but the patient's voice stopped her. You see, Mary, he began kindly, life is such that sometimes you can't figure out what's really happening. Pamela and I got involved very quickly. In reality, I haven't been in business that long. My father managed everything before. But age caught up with him, and it became hard for him to manage the entire empire, so he decided to pass everything on to me. It was at one of these receptions that he introduced me to Pamela and her parents, and later confided that he dreamed of joining our families. Their fortune is no less, if not greater than ours. So, my father wanted me to marry quickly so our businesses could merge. You know, I don't understand why I'm telling you all this. It seems because, in our circles, it's not customary to share personal things, but with you, I feel like I can speak freely without fear. Mary looked at Tyler and said, I also enjoy talking with you. Maybe you should reconsider and postpone the wedding? The banker smiled sadly and replied, No, everything is already decided. My father is seriously ill, fears he won't live to see his grandchildren, and is rushing everything. So, I'll make him happy. Mary left the room, thinking she really wanted to help Tyler but didn't know how. The solution came completely unexpectedly. That evening, when she returned home, she turned on her old TV as usual and was about to switch the channel from the news when she suddenly saw familiar faces. The screen showed a photo of a happily smiling Tyler hugging his fiancée. Then there were shots of luxurious limousines and a huge banquet hall. The announcer talked about the meticulous preparations for one of the most high-profile weddings of the year, detailing the expenses on the young couple's outfits, the restaurant, and other wedding attributes. He ended by announcing that the celebration would take place the next day at noon. Mary immediately decided, whatever it took, she had to be at that wedding, especially since she had a day off. Mary understood that this was the most reckless decision of her life, but she didn't want to act otherwise. It seemed to her that some inner voice was persistently urging her to be near Tyler at that moment and try to prevent the terrible event. Deciding not to tell David, she claimed to feel unwell and canceled their date on her day off. She then diligently prepared to attend the wedding. Choosing what she considered her most elegant dress from her not-so-large wardrobe, she carefully styled her hair and, putting on the dress, was satisfied with her reflection in the mirror. But all her confidence evaporated as soon as she saw how the other guests were dressed. The men were all in formal suits, and the women mostly in long evening gowns adorned with expensive jewelry. Feeling momentarily lost, Mary paused at the restaurant entrance but then gathered her courage and stepped inside. Tyler, smiling hospitably, was greeting the guests. The bride stood aside, surrounded by her friends. A 2-meter-tall brute stepped in front of Mary, trying to block her path, but the banker immediately called out to him. Recognizing her, he ordered the guard to let her pass. It was clear he was surprised by her appearance, and Mary overheard him telling the guard, "Let this crazy woman through. Let her in since she's come." Those words made it clear to Mary that he still hadn't fully believed what she had written to him. But she decided not to give up on her plan and stood off to the side, observing the proceedings. She felt very out of place among all these people, and the guests looked at her with a certain disdain. Compared to everyone else present, her dress, which had seemed flawless just recently, now looked shabby. Even the waitresses in this largest establishment in the city were dressed better than she was. Mary swallowed the lump in her throat and, holding back tears, reassured herself that she had come to save a good person and, no matter the cost, she would save him. While thinking about all this, Mary suddenly noticed Pamela, who had turned her back to the guests and the groom, quickly pouring something into a glass of champagne. Then, with a charming smile, she turned to Tyler and handed him the drink. What happened next was like a nightmare. Mary rushed to the groom and knocked the glass out of his hand with all her strength. The drink spilled onto his suit, and the glass hit the floor with a crash, shattering into tiny fragments. The room fell into a deathly silence, and Tyler, coming to his senses, shouted, "Have you completely lost your mind? Security, get this lunatic out of here. I let her in out of the goodness of my heart, and she decides to cause a scene." A guard approached, took Mary by the elbow, and escorted her out. She had no choice but to go home. All evening, David kept calling, but she didn't feel like talking to anyone. The next morning, as soon as she arrived at work, she sensed an unusual level of interest in her. Everyone was whispering and giving her sidelong glances. It was only from the talkative Amanda that she learned the reason for all these looks. It turned out that almost every local newspaper had featured an article about the previous night's banquet and her antics on their front pages. Some wrote that a madwoman had crashed the event without an invitation. Others described her as a jealous nurse in love with the wealthy banker. Mary wished she could sink into the ground from all this nonsense. But all of this faded when she read in the newspaper Amanda handed her that the banker had fallen ill in his car on the way home after the banquet. In critical condition, he was taken to the hospital. At that moment, Mary realized that Tyler had indeed managed to drink the poison. She remembered the name of the drug mentioned by the fiancé during the conversation she had overheard in the hospital room and, returning home, began searching her medical reference books, which she had bought long ago. At that moment, Mary was glad she had been preparing for medical school. Learning everything about the drug, she understood that Tyler had managed to drink at least half a glass, but the poison, combined with alcohol, had done its job. All the news outlets that day were devoted to the unfortunate banker. The newlywed wife was giving interviews, theatrically sighing and even attempting to shed a tear or two, while on camera she indignantly lamented. "It's all because of your free healthcare system. I told him, let's go to a private clinic, but Tyler refused. It's the doctor's fault, over-medicating him with everything possible and then releasing him too early. Tyler was still sick, and that scoundrel of a chief doctor likely let him go for a bribe." Mary was seething inside, knowing who had insisted on treatment at this hospital and for what reason. The doctor was falsely accused and even charged with taking a bribe, which he definitely did not do. Every time the news was about to start, she would quietly leave her tasks and head to the patient lounge, where the television was on. Mary eagerly caught every word whenever they talked about their former patient. But the news was grim. The doctors were doing everything they could to save his life, but Tyler was getting worse. She berated herself for not knocking the glass out of his hand a few minutes earlier, then he wouldn't have had time to drink even the small amount of poison that he did. During the workday, David called her several times, but she replied via text message that she was very busy and decided to postpone their conversation. Mary knew he was probably already aware of what had happened and had likely seen her photo in the restaurant in some newspaper. By evening, she saw David nervously pacing near the hospital entrance. As soon as she approached, he started venting his frustration without holding back. "Can you explain what that was all about? Are you out of your mind? Have you completely lost it? Running around like a puppy after that rich guy?" That evening, they had their first major argument. As they neared her home, Mary, surprising even herself, said, "You know what, if you're already making such a scene now, what will it be like later? You can't live with someone if you don't trust them. I think it's better if we break up." David stood frozen, but realizing that Mary wasn't joking, he snapped angrily, "You're such a fool. Go to your banker." He turned and left, while Mary surprisingly felt relieved. At that moment, she was glad she hadn't allowed their relationship to progress further. Now, helping Tyler was more important to her, as if some force was pushing her toward it. The next day, as soon as she arrived at work, Lori informed her that an inspection had descended upon the hospital. In a conspiratorial whisper, she said, "Can you believe it? The chief physician and our head doctor have been suspended, so to speak, pending an investigation. They come to work to stay informed, but stay holed up in their offices. Many believe that the condition of the patient, who had fallen into a coma, was solely the fault of the doctors in their department. Only Mary knew who was truly responsible. After some thought, she decided to tell the head doctor everything. Kevin Ross listened to her silently and then said sadly, "If the scoundrels used the drug you mentioned, proving it was poisoning is almost impossible. It's like a time bomb, it kills not immediately, but after some time. Now it's clear why the patient fell ill on the way home. He's lucky you didn't let him drink the entire glass. If he had, he wouldn't have made it home alive. And the worst part is, this poison is so insidious that detecting it in the blood is nearly impossible, especially after some time has passed." Kevin Ross sighed and added, The most we can do is report the possibility of poisoning to the authorities, but without concrete evidence, it will be difficult to prove anything. Still, we must try. Thank you, Mary, for your courage to come forward. I will inform the appropriate people and we will do our best to investigate this matter thoroughly. Leave it alone, Mary. Let the wealthy sort out who tried to poison whom and who wanted to take whose place. As you can see, I've already taken the brunt of it. I wanted to do good for someone, to get him back on his feet quickly, to have him be somewhat healthy for his wedding, and instead, I got accused of all sorts of things. Let it be as it is. After the conversation, Mary decided that she was going to expose the poisoners no matter what. She didn't quite understand how to do it yet, but she had an idea. Seizing a moment, she approached Amanda with a pleading look. Amanda had boasted several times about dating a guy who worked in the police force. Amanda, darling, please help me out. I really need to find out where our banker's father lives. He mentioned while he was here that his father is very ill. I want to see if he needs any help. Could you ask your Bruce to find out the address and, generally, who lives with him and how he's doing? I'll do anything you want in return. Amanda looked at her slyly and whispered, Let me sleep in the morning. You'll take the thermometers around and wake the patients. And stay on the night shift to cover for me. If something happens, wake me up. I had a rough night and only slept a couple of hours. Seeing Mary energetically nodding, Amanda laughed and added, All right. Come back in an hour. I think I'll have something for you by then. An hour later, Mary already knew that Tyler's father's name was Leo Ford. He lived alone in a large country house. His wife had passed away several years ago, and Tyler, living separately, visited as needed. Caregivers looked after Mr. Ford, but they changed almost every couple of months. The most interesting thing, Amanda suddenly interrupted her story. Bruce says it's unclear why these caregivers keep leaving. This guy is a well-known businessman in the city, and everyone talks about him as a polite, intelligent, and kind person. Well, that's perfect, Mary said, somehow cheerfully. Now I'll take care of him until Tyler gets better. Besides, I think he needs help right now. That same day, right after work, Mary went to the address Amanda had given her. Introducing herself as a caregiver, she quickly found common ground with Tyler's father. Despite his status, he turned out to be a very good-natured and open person. Deciding she couldn't wait any longer, Mary told him everything she knew about Pamela's treacherous plan and the poisoning of his son. She could see in his eyes that he didn't fully believe her, just like his son. The entire time she spoke, Mr. Ford stared thoughtfully out the window, then turned and abruptly said, That's complete nonsense. Pamela's father is my best friend and almost my partner. Why would they poison Tyler? We dreamed of marrying our children, uniting our businesses, and having mutual grandchildren. Mary suddenly replied in the same tone. Don't you think they might not have wanted to unite or share with anyone, but simply take over your business? The old man looked at her sternly but said nothing. He spent the rest of the day almost not talking to Mary, lost in his thoughts. In the evening, as she was about to leave, Leo Ford said, You see, Mary, not everything in life can be measured by money. I don't know how much longer I will live, but Tyler, my only son, must live, no matter what it costs. He is the most valuable thing I have. Mary turned around, tears in her eyes, and barely whispered, Oh, you must live too, and you will live. Tyler will be back on his feet. And it's very good that he didn't drink the entire glass of poison. There's a chance for survival. The next day, she rushed to her department to write an application for unpaid leave, deciding not to quit just yet. Amanda was already waiting for her and whispered conspiratorially, Have you heard the news? The whole city is buzzing. Our bride turned out to be very cunning. She managed everything so well that no prenuptial agreement was signed before the wedding. I don't know for what reason. Now, control of all our banker's business passes into her hands. For now, of course, it's temporary while her husband is ill, but in case you know what happens, she will be the full owner. Tyler's father has already signed everything over to his son. It can't be said that this news surprised Mary, but on her way to Mr. Ford's house in the suburban village, she bought several newspapers where Pamela was once again prominently featured, giving interviews. Her face showed no trace of sorrow, and she barely mentioned her comatose husband. Instead, she eagerly shared her plans for managing his business, frequently mentioning her father, saying that he supports and helps her in everything. Mr. Ford carefully studied the press Mary brought. Then, taking off his glasses, he said sadly, "Well, that's how it happens. When I got sick, I completely stepped away from business. Tyler managed everything very well without me, and to be honest, I wasn't up to it. I feel better now, but back then, I thought I wouldn't last a couple of days. Mary, please give me the phone." He made just one call. She didn't hear the conversation, but Mr. Ford, after speaking with someone, said that a very good person would arrive in half an hour and needed to be met. The guest appeared at the specified time. He was a stately silver-haired gentleman, about the same age as the host. They talked for a long time in his office, after which the man left. Mary timidly went to Leo. He was sitting by the window, staring into the distance, nervously smoking a pipe. "What are you doing? You can't smoke." "Give me that thing right now," she exclaimed indignantly. Without turning around, he handed her the pipe and said thoughtfully, "How wrong I was, thinking I was a good judge of character. Living so many years in this world, I never thought some people could be capable of this. I helped Victor, my current father-in-law, build his business from scratch. To be honest, Tyler married Pamela more because of my will than his own. It turned out that the visitor was the former head of company security, now a well-deserved retiree and a good friend of Leo Ford. He detailed how Pamela's family had no dreams of becoming related to him. They had a completely different plan. Despite the supposed friendship with Mr. Ford, the bride's father was literally dreaming of taking over his business. When he learned that Mr. Ford was seriously ill and had transferred all his assets to his son, he and his daughter devised this devious plan to poison Tyler. Mr. Ford was not even considered a factor, as if he were already dead. After speaking his mind, the host suddenly turned to Mary and said, "All right, Mary, prepare my formal suit. It's time to pay a visit to the bank. Tomorrow morning, I'll ask Jason, the one who came by recently, to arrange transport and help me set things right." With a wink, he added energetically, "They counted us out too soon. We're not done fighting yet." The next morning, a car was already at the house, and the driver helped Mr. Ford move from his wheelchair to the car. Surprisingly, he skillfully folded the wheelchair and placed it in the trunk. "Mr. Ford, how are you feeling? Should I come with you?" Mary asked anxiously as she came out to see them off. The head of the house smiled and replied calmly, "No, dear, stay home. I think I can handle it myself. Today is the board of directors meeting, and all the men there are smart. I think they'll sort it out quickly." Mary handed him a small bottle of medicine and said, "Just don't worry or stress yourself, it's not good for you. Take these heart drops with you. Keep them handy, and everything will be fine." At that moment, she truly believed what she was saying. The wait for his return seemed like an eternity. When she finally heard the sound of the approaching car, she sighed in relief and ran to greet him. Mr. Ford looked very tired and, seeing the unspoken question in Mary's eyes, said weakly, "Don't worry so much. Everything is, thank God, fine. Our bank remains ours. But it was tough. Thanks to James, he wheeled me around there." He looked gratefully at the driver, who was helping him move back to his wheelchair. At home, after changing clothes, Mr. Ford lay down on the couch, took his medicine, and lay silently for half an hour. Seeing his condition, Mary decided to wait until he had rested and was ready to talk about how things had gone. Over the past few days, they had grown very close, and Leo had come to enjoy talking with her. After resting and calming down, he explained that the trip was very exhausting. It was challenging to persuade the board of directors to keep the bank within the family, but he managed. Mary was genuinely happy, but they were both saddened by one thing, the fact that Tyler's condition remained critical. In the morning, Mary found Mr. Ford in a very unpleasant state. It was unclear what had impacted his health more, worries about his son or the trip to the bank, but Mary immediately called a doctor. Leo had been under the care of a well-known city professor for a long time, and he arrived without delay. He spent a long time in the room with Mr. Ford before coming out and inviting Mary for a conversation. I understand that while Tyler is in a coma, there's no one else to take care of the old man besides you. And by the way, he spoke very highly of you. So, you simply must convince him to have surgery. He needs a bone marrow transplant. If this isn't done soon, he won't survive. It's his only chance. The doctor left, and Mary went to Mr. Ford's room with the firm intention of talking about the surgery, but he just sighed and said weakly, "Am I against it? But where can I find a donor? I've already contacted a famous bank abroad, but there's a queue there too." Mary looked at him in surprise and asked, "And your son, Tyler? Why didn't you turn to him as soon as you found out about the illness?" He was silent for a while before quietly beginning to speak. "A long time ago, when I was young, I was very much in love with a girl. We even planned to get married and have children, but we broke up over something foolish. A few years later, I married a woman who loved me very much and lived happily until Stephanie died of cancer. Even money couldn't save her. From the first day, we lived soul to soul. There was one problem. Shortly before the wedding, I caught some infection, even ended up in intensive care, and after that, having children was out of the question. But Stephanie, upon learning this, didn't leave me and suggested we take a child from an orphanage. That's how Tyler became our happiness and the meaning of our life. So, as you now understand, Mary, he can't be my donor because he isn't my biological son." Mary saw how difficult this story was for Mr. Ford to tell, and leaving the room, she quickly brought a sedative. After taking the medicine, he looked at Mary and suddenly said, "You know, I couldn't understand who you reminded me of. Only now, remembering everything, I realized that you look a lot like my first love. Please bring the photo album from the top drawer in my office." Mary, fulfilling his request, handed him a small velvet rectangle, and Mr. Ford felt his way through the pages to pull out a photo and handed it to her. Taking the black and white photograph in her hands, Mary sank onto a nearby chair, staring at it without looking away. "Dear, are you all right?" The worried host raised himself on the pillow. "What happened? Do you know this woman?" Barely able to speak, Mary whispered, "Was her name Helen?" Seeing Mr. Ford nod, she added, holding back tears, "Helen was my mother. She was my mother. She died unexpectedly from a severe illness. The doctor said we had neglected her condition, but she never complained about her health. I later found out that she was taking strong painkillers and enduring it all," Mary said, looking at Mr. Ford. She saw that he was staring at her, silently crying. Then he suddenly asked, "How old are you? Forgive the indiscreet question, but could you tell me your exact date of birth?" When Mary gave him the day, month, and year, he thought for a few seconds, as if calculating something, then reached out his hands to her. "You are my daughter. There's no doubt about it. When I parted ways with Helen, I noticed she had become pale and nauseous. She must have been pregnant with you. How could I not have realized that? What an idiot I was." Mary took his hands, and unable to hold back her tears, she began to cry. They sat holding hands, talking for a long time. Leo wanted to know everything about her mother's life and about Mary herself. The next day, when the doctor came to check on Mr. Ford, Mary told him about the newly discovered circumstances and said she was ready to become a donor for her father that very day to save his life. "Well, it doesn't happen that quickly," the doctor replied, surprising her. "We need to do a paternity test first, a DNA test, and then we can consider the surgery." A few days later, the document confirming their father-daughter relationship was ready. preparations for the surgery began, and it seemed as if someone above had heard Mary's prayers. On the day Mr. Ford was scheduled for surgery, the hospital where Tyler was admitted called to inform them that he had regained consciousness. This news delighted the businessman, and before the operation, he told Mary, "Now I simply have to live. I have a daughter, and it seems my son has pulled through." That same day, upon learning of Tyler's improvement, Mary went to visit him in the clinic. She started visiting Mr. Ford and Tyler every day. Tyler was surprised to see her. "It's you again. You really are crazy, but it seems you were right. You knocked over the glass at the wedding because you knew it was poisoned?" Mary told him everything from the beginning, how the bride had added the poison, how his father was informed of the wicked intentions of the treacherous family, and about the reclaimed business. "I will destroy her, wipe her off the face of the earth," Tyler said angrily at the end of the conversation. Then, after a moment of silence, he added, "But why dirty my hands with that filth? Tomorrow I'll tell my lawyer to file for divorce." Mary didn't mention another piece of news, that she was Leo Ford's daughter, deciding to save that revelation for another time. Saying goodbye, she promised to come back after checking on Mr. Ford. Imagine her surprise when, the next day, as soon as she stepped into Tyler's room, she saw Pamela in the throes of a hysterical fit. Pamela, crying, was trying to profess her love and beg Tyler not to divorce her. But when Tyler saw Mary enter, he suddenly said, "I can't stand to see you. You disgust me. A stranger, just a simple orderly from the hospital, has treated me better than my dear wife. If it weren't for her, you'd certainly be a widow, much to your delight." Mary looked challengingly into the eyes of the poisoner and said, "I'm not a stranger. I am the biological daughter of Leo Ford. When he recovers, he can confirm it." It was hard to tell who was more surprised at that moment, Tyler or Pamela. After that, Pamela slammed the door and stormed out of the room. Tyler, looking at Mary, smiled and said, "Well, Red, from the first day, you haven't stopped surprising me. Go on, tell me everything." Mary told him about the love story between her mother and Mr. Ford, their separation, and her life with her mother. When she finished, Tyler took her hand and quietly said, "You know, you're extraordinary. When I'm back on my feet, will you go on a date with me? Why are you looking at me like that? I know I'm not a biological child. Mother Stephanie told me before she died. So, it's perfectly fine for me to ask you out to thank you for saving me." Mary felt her face flush. But without hesitation, she lowered her eyes and replied, "Of course. Why else would I have tried to save a fool like you?" By a fortunate coincidence, Tyler and Mr. Ford were discharged from the hospital on the same day. Loyal friend Jason, or rather, as they now knew, Jason Brown, sent a car to bring them all home. Mary had prepared a festive table for their return, and everyone shared their joyful emotions over the meal. At one point, Tyler looked at Mary and suddenly said, "Father, while I was in the hospital, I thought everything over, and as absurd as it sounds, I'm asking for your daughter's hand. This red-haired beast has surprised me from day one. She's unlike any girl I've known. After saving both me and you, I feel it's my duty to marry her. Besides, I know we're not blood-related." Leo Ford smiled and jokingly replied, "Well, once you've divorced your shrew, come and ask properly. Although, what's the point? Jason, will you help organize another noisy celebration? What can I do if my son changes wives like gloves?" Jason Brown, who was invited to the dinner, smirked and replied, "Leo, who doesn't make mistakes in life? Besides, we still need to figure out whose mistake it really was. But now, I hope this marriage will last forever. I'll do everything I can." Tyler took Mary's hand and gently asked, "And do you agree?" She smiled happily and hugged him. In that moment, she was truly happy, not in a dream, as it had been before, but in real life.